Hello, and welcome to the Health Go Live webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Intelligent Medical Objects. We would like to remind you that the chat feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions for the panel throughout the discussion. Our speakers would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Grace Vinton.
Hello, healthcare innovation family. I am Grace Vinton, PR pro, podcast host of award-winning Hit Like a Girl's High Tea with Grace. And I'm the host of today's webinar, AI and Machine Learning in Healthcare, From Promises to Practice. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this engaging discussion, exploring transformative potential of AI in the healthcare industry. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to understand why this topic should matter to each and every one of us. The integration of AI and machine learning in healthcare isn't just a buzzworthy topic, and that's why you're all here today. It holds the promise of revolutionizing patient care, diagnostics, drug development, research. And as we embark on the discussion today, keep in mind that the advancements we discuss have a direct impact on the experiences of both healthcare providers and, more importantly, the patients they serve. As patient advocate for young mothers navigating healthcare post-birth and a patient representative for Sequoia Project's Care Quality Interoperability Framework, I can say wholeheartedly that patient care can only be holistic if the data shows a holistic view of the patient at the point of care, and that it's accurate and understandable so that the patient encounter can be about all the things the data can't possibly show: family and caregiver relationships, religious or ethical considerations, personal hardships, and more. So today we're going to hear from industry experts about real-world applications, challenges, successes, and what the future holds for AI, ML, and other great technologies out there right now. Enough from me, let's get started. These people are taking calculated risks and are seriously changing the game. So I'd love to introduce our panelists today. First off, we have Dr. Amal Bala, Senior Director of Clinical Informatics at IMO. We also have Dr. Megan Dirks, Chief Data Officer at Komodo Health, and Dr. Mary Jacobson, Chief Medical Officer at Hello Alpha. Hello to each of you. Thanks for joining us today. I'd love to start off with a quick intro from each of you. First, Dr. Amal.
Hey everyone, so Dr. Amal Bala, I am the Senior Director of Clinical Informatics at Intelligent Medical Objects. Background is I am a clinician, but I'm also a computer scientist and worked really extensively in academia. So background is in interoperability in the informatics sphere, working in precision medicine programs, and now working with Intelligent Medical Objects to really disrupt the industry with some really fun technology. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Megan Dirks, would love to hear from you as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Dirks. I'm the Chief Data Officer at Komodo Health. Just briefly, Komodo Health is a software and analytics company. We deliver to our end users very advanced analytic tooling that sits on top of the largest real-world data asset available in the market now. It assembles longitudinal health records in a de-identified way on approximately 250 million lives. And what that has done is it's enabled researchers, health systems, payers, the life sciences industry, medical device industry to have unprecedented ability to extract insights about how healthcare is delivered, its equitability, how effectively various therapeutics and new technologies are being offered, and how cost-effective care is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Megan Dirks. And I'd love to hear from Dr. Mary Jacobson now.
Thanks, Grace. Dr. Mary Jacobson. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist by training and Chief Medical Officer of Hello Alpha. Hello Alpha is a nationwide virtual primary care platform specializing in women's health. We practice asynchronous telemedicine, meaning that all of our patient communication is in writing. There's no scheduling. This forces data to be structured on the medical intake forms via machine learning and removes implicit bias in the office.
Thank you so much. We are so thrilled to have such an amazing panel today to be able to share so much of their knowledge with us. So let's kick this party off right. Let's set the foundation a little bit. When we're speaking to AI and machine learning, I would say a lot of folks are thinking maybe generative AI, large language models. Like, what are we speaking to? Can we set the foundation? What are we talking to today? And Dr. Amal Bala, I'd love for you to start.
Definitely. So we could go the philosophical route where logic evolved from, which is the ancient Greeks. We've got to thank them for their lovely work, but it kind of goes from there. AI is not new. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not novel. It's been around for years. And then if you really want to take like a true, like, hey, this is the first cut of AI. I love doing background research on, when I'm entering a new type of strategy or new domain, but machine learning is really, really part of who I am. But the first actual true signs of artificial intelligence is actually vending machines. And the first one was built in the 1800s to bend out postcards. And if you think about that, that's such a simple thing as you put in the correct coin amount to dispense something. We've kind of fast forward a little bit towards, World War II, where we start thinking of like the devices like the Enigma machines and how it helped us to basically uncode something and code something, or aka pattern recognition. And that's where you kind of start thinking the more modern AI approaches. And there's a whole plethora of journeys there. So when I think of AI, I kind of think of the journey and I think of the steps in between. And now AI is kind of like a common vernacular for everything from large language models to knowledge graphs, to inferences there, to machine learning opportunities, statistical, like deterministic or probabilistic approach, natural language processing. I think of it as the holistic package now as blanket under AI.
That's fascinating. Now, I really would love to learn from each of you with all these major advances now happening from vending machines to now, but now advances in healthcare and AI and ML. How are each of your organizations currently leveraging or planning to leverage this technology within your offerings? And what were the initial challenges you had when doing that? And how did you overcome those challenges? And I'd love to hear of any real world examples too on why this tech matters. I'll start with Dr. Mary Jacobson on this one.
Sure. So, like I mentioned, when we structured our medical intake forms, at least for me, because I wrote them based on clinical guidelines and we treat over 100 medical conditions, we had to think through the decision trees patients would make along the way in order for the provider to review the responses and to communicate with them a treatment plan. So we had to be really strategic about how we were asking these questions. We want to minimize messaging back and forth because we want to have a nice experience for the patient and make it affordable. I just want to give one example, Grace. So let's say we're seeing a patient on our platform asynchronously for anxiety and depressive symptoms. They're going to complete validated questionnaires. If anyone's familiar with the PHQ-9, that's a validated questionnaire about depression. So patients that respond that they've thought, unfortunately, about harming themselves in the last 2 weeks, then they'll go and then they'll complete the suicidality questions from Columbia Lighthouse Project. So that's just an example of a decision tree that patients would follow. And then obviously we have policies and protocols on the back end with respect to our responses.
That's very fascinating. It's interesting. You think of AI, you think of robotics, right? And the robots and that, but it's really practical. It's making those practical choices so that physicians have the best possible information they can to make the choices they need to make, and patients do as well. Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love to hear from you.
So at Komodo, we have been able to integrate AI and machine learning in several different capacities. And I'll give 3 examples because it kind of illustrates how they complement each other. The first is, you might have recalled that I mentioned at the beginning, our tooling on which our end users generate insights sits on a de-identified longitudinal corpus of data. By de-identifying the data, that enables us to have the highest levels of privacy protection. At the same time, though, we want to be able to reliably relink events on a population's sort of longitudinal clinical utilization history. The process of de-identification creates the potential for mismatching because you don't have access to all of the very unique identifiers. They've been essentially hashed or obfuscated. And so in order to confirm or reinforce the confidence with which we are connecting a token, which is the term we use for the identifier of a patient after we've removed all of their normal identifiers, the confidence with which we know we have correctly attached that token to the clinical data and reassembled a very sometimes 5 to 10 year longitudinal clinical record is really powered and enhanced by some AI methods. A broad term is Bayesian methods that give us confidence. And what that has enabled us to do is, there have been end users of de-identified data, real world data for a very long time, but this enables us to deliver really the most reliable, clean, complete data that we think is available on the market. Now, a second example is much more clinical, which is, again, we have some end users who are interested in generating insights or identifying patients who have very rare diseases. And when you think about rare diseases, they don't necessarily have a code or a label. They instead, some people have heard about the diagnostic odyssey. It's essentially a pattern recognition task. And that's an example of our ability to apply AI and ML methods to be able to extract a pattern and with confidence very quickly, even before a provider may recognize it, suggests that a patient may have an undiagnosed or rare disease. And then the third is very practical, which is that our end users are doing analysis, generating reports, doing research on this foundation of data. We know our end users vary in skill. Some have very high code, very proficient expertise. Others have more of a low code need. They more or less want to be able to kind of interact in a very natural way. And what we have done is trained the newest large language models to be able to interact with an end user, answer or essentially select, write code, run analytics on the data from someone simply describing in very natural language, please find me, everyone, with the following. Oh, by the way, make sure they have this insurance. Oh, by the way, make sure they're under this age or over this age. And so that's an area where we've taken the much more well-recognized large language models and applied them in a useful way.
Fascinating, really, truly fascinating. Dr. Bala, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Oh, definitely. So intelligent medical objects IMO, we kind of play in between both Megan's world and Mary's world. So we have, I like to say we have two really amazing kind of like portfolios, if you want to think about it. So we think from a provider enablement perspective and then a data enablement perspective. So where AI and machine learning and everything kind of comes to play is we kind of bucket into those two activities. What can we do to either disrupt ourselves, which is the fun enablement features of both the portfolios, but also then we all looked at it from how can we operationalize ourselves a little bit more efficiently too. So let's just drill into a little bit about the provider enablement. So IMO, we basically have developed a language over the last 25 years, which pretty much allows a clinician, such as Megan, Mary, and myself, to really talk like a clinician and really avoid how the structured coding systems behave behind the scenes. So I can go ahead and say, hey, this patient is presenting with these various features, but ultimately the diagnosis is type 2 diabetes mellitus. And then if there's additional features, such as chronic end-stage renal disease, we can codify that correctly. So that is the language that's going into it. And so we're looking at basically large language models, different type of machine learning approaches to really allow a clinician to continue to behave like a clinician. Here's a fun little tangential thing is if you put myself, Mary, and Megan in a room with a patient, one patient, we will all come up with our opinion of what that diagnosis is, and we will approach it with what's based on our training. AKA, the entire system is pretty much predicated on our opinion based on the features that we can elucidate from the patient. So that's where we look at the features of the data and how to really enable them. And that's where IMO has been really investing into that area. It's to allow providers with the best expertise to allow them to basically codify the journey correctly behind the scenes and semantically align all that data. So machine learning plays a big play there. But additionally, is the second part, is the data enablement feature. IMO has, we've taken a very strategic bet in this area. And we did our first acquisition this year of a AI company called Melax Technology. And that's how much we've invested into this sphere, is and knowing where it's going, the entire AI paradigm is going towards. And so what that means is we work with like Megan to make sure that all the data behind the scene is correctly, I would say, like aligned syntactically and semantically to operationalize themselves a little bit more. So that's the data piece. So that's where we're kind of thinking about. And then of course, you know, improvements of operations. There's a really fun statistic that we found out, but current attrition rates of clinicians from medical school into residency programs is diminishing. It's about 30% right now is batches of clinicians are not going into practicing medicine. I'm actually one of them. So what does that mean? Is that we have to give them, the clinicians, bigger force power. There's not going to be many implementations down the road because we're a small pool. So that's where we look at the operational efficiencies too. It's a better enablement of our teams.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting how the foundational layer of data is so critical to the future of AI in healthcare. And those conversations, you know, we're hearing a lot about AI, but we really don't think about how it needs to be both clear and specific, like clean and clear, right? For it to actually be able to work well. We have a really interesting question from the audience that I'd love to present to you all. Can you talk about explainability or the lack thereof in many of the AI approaches or models? You know, and they give an example: neural networks, foundational LLMs, etc. They're all black boxes and mostly opaque. I'll start with you, Dr. Dirks, on that, if you'd like to kind of speak to that topic.
Yeah, I want to mention I want to throw two terms out and give my interpretation of them. They're both important. In the area of AI and ML, there is interpretability and explainability. And I think about interpretability as being able to understand what a model actually did. Being able to justify why one model is better than another. Having the ability to demonstrate that the model, and now this has become a bit of a concern for some applications, making sure the model didn't just memorize the data, that it actually is learning from it. The way in which it can be quite difficult, the more complex the models get, the more difficult it is to know how it actually chose weights, how it chose a function, for example, on the neural nets. So there is an indirect way of getting to the interpretability, and that would be in terms of doing repeatability, reuse, generalizability, and that's going to actually be very important from a standpoint of regulatory oversight. On the explainability, that's slightly different. Explainability is important. It's more summarizing the reasons for why a model behaved in a certain way. And that is probably what most end users pay attention to, because it really, you really want models ideally to give the end user some ability to understand why, the causality behind it, and it's key to gaining the trust of the end user. And so there, I think that is just in terms of the design, being able to at least show the stepwise sort of accumulation of evidence can help with that causality. But the participant is absolutely right in that the most complex models become very challenging to enable the end user to know exactly what the model did and why it did it.
healthcare data, it's so complex, right? How does your development team tackle the challenge of working with this nuanced healthcare data and language, given all of that? I'd love to share for you to share some insights into your approach. I'll start with Dr. Amal Bala on that.
Wow, that's a pretty deep question, and I think we could probably spend the rest of the time. Yes, not only is our data extremely complex, it's also very opinionated, as we were kind of alluding to in our previous question. And then along with that, it's also confined by regulation too, not only at a federal level, but it's also tied to regulations on a state legislature too. And so the way that we approach it is that we pretty much strategically, our operations, 60% of IMO is actually focused on understanding the inflection point between operationalizing a provider, but the inflection point of what the regulatory needs are too. So we insert ourselves in the entire life cycle with the engineering teams, working with everybody basically across the board to make sure that we can build products, build solutions, or even come up with a one-off solution to support our clients pervasively in that type of manner. So yeah, it's quite hair-raising how complex this data can get.
It does seem that, as we're talking to AI and ML advancements, we really need to talk about earning trust and driving adoption, right? With healthcare providers who may be wary, do I really need to add this to my tech stack, right? So, I'd love to talk about, how do you address market skepticism and earn trust to drive adoption? Dr. Mary Jacobson, I'd love for you to address that topic.
I can tell you, Grace, it's been somewhat of a struggle in telemedicine. I read one question that was asked before about basically transactional care and how do you provide a relational experience with the patient or whole person care. And by the way, when you think about telemedicine, I'm going a little bit off topic here, but the internet is transactional. So if you're using the internet as a vehicle for telemedicine, how do you create a whole person care experience? So in terms of, I'm an early adopter, obviously. We started doing asynchronous telemedicine in 2018 pre-COVID. And I can tell you, it is hard to get medical directors, and the other doctors can probably attest to this, to get medical doctors on board with as early adapters to technology. And I've had much more success with advanced practice providers. I mentioned our model before with respect to removing implicit bias out. So our 100% of our patients whom we treat for preventive health complete a depression screen. So we do things that are linked to HEDIS scores versus in the office, you're not going to get 100%. The goal is to get 80%. So, and by the way, we have dedicated primary care providers on our platform, and that's through machine learning, deciding where these providers are licensed and if they're allowed to see the patient. And then when the patient messages back or completes another visit, that'll go directly to their primary care provider, just like in brick and mortar. So I think, again, I'm being more of the end user as opposed to the level of depth of experience of my other colleagues.
It's great to hear that perspective. Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love to hear from you as well. What are some of the market skepticisms you hear out there? How are you guys trying to earn trust and drive adoption in this space?
Yeah, so I think you have to lead with first picking the right problem to apply what is a very resource-intensive technology. And so what we tend to try to do is first choose the problems for which more conventional analytic approaches or where the available evidence base is insufficient to enable our end users to gain the insights that they need. So then that really narrows things down. The second thing is that there has to be what I would call sort of a materially significant improvement in either the quality of the decision, the quality of the result, the speed with which someone can actually come to a decision by virtue of the use of AI and ML. And if it's not significant, and here's where you'll see some pure data scientists, I'm not, I myself consider myself a data scientist, so I'm hopefully not disparaging anyone, but a pure statistical approach will sort of declare victory when the ROC is slightly improved, or when there's some, minor statistical improvement. We are looking for something that's really material and impactful to an end user in terms of the decision they're trying to make. The second thing that's really critical is it has to be deployable, meaning you can create models or you can create advanced analytic methodologies, but if they can't be delivered or deployed to support the workflow, and whether that workflow is a business analyst trying to understand something about the market penetration, or in the case of a clinical application, the workflow of the end users trying to make a decision about direct patient care in the setting, if you cannot deploy it in a way in which it as seamlessly as possible fits into the natural workflow, then it's very unlikely to really gain uptake, even if it's trusted. So I think those are some basic principles. There are a number of other ones, but I think those are really key to increasing the probability of success and uptake and adoption by your end users.
Very, very interesting. As it's so fascinating. I'd love to learn more about, what kind of prompted your team to prioritize AI and innovation and product development, and how did you decide between developing it in-house and finding someone else to work with or partner with, and then, how do you convince others to incorporate yours into their tech stack instead of just building it themselves? Dr. Amal, I'd love for you to take that one.
So as I mentioned earlier, I was invested over the last 25 years to come up with a language that our clinicians speak. So when we saw the evolution of large language models and the industry push towards AI, instantaneously we were like, okay, this is where we can enable our clinicians a lot more effectively with our products. And that was kind of our hypothesis. So from that kind of entailed into how we kind of like operationalize ourselves is very strategic groups looking towards developing the strategy out longitudinally. Does this type of investment, should we outsource? Should we develop internally? What type of investments do we need to do? For instance, many out of the box large language models do not speak clinician, or they can hallucinate certain type of diagnoses. How does IMO strategically play in that role to make sure we reduce that type of generalities and hallucinations, biasness, and provide that type of provenance back in a traceable manner? So that's kind of like where you kind of go from there, and then every single step of the way, I think all of us can kind of think about it's the buy versus build decision. And so what makes the best strategic bet for your organization is based on the investment amount and how fast do you want to get to the market. And so you kind of have to do that type of cost benefit analysis. And as I mentioned, we are very bullish in this area. And so we did a strategic acquisition of an AI company. That's how bullish we are.
Dr. Dirks, I'd love for you to answer this too.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of things from my perspective. First, perhaps the audience is fully aware of this, that these AI and ML can be very resource intensive to develop and, most importantly, to maintain. These models need to be maintained. They may have variable rates at which you're going to have to recalibrate them. They may have customer specific needs around calibration, et cetera. So I think it's really important to be realistic about what the cost of maintaining these models are. I think the other really important thing is that I think the lay community has begun to sort of almost think about AI and ML as being more magical than it really is. It turns out it really functions on a foundation of data. And so for us, whenever we're making a decision about developing or investing in a particular new application of AI, we have to do an appraisal of the quality and the performance capabilities of the data on which it will be trained and learned. And you have to be very realistic. There are some instances where there may be a fantastic application, but your data are simply insufficient to support that and generate a really reliable and very valuable sort of outcome. And I think the last is around being just very tactical and perhaps a little bit strategic on our part, which is we think very hard about whether or not the investment in one of these more advanced AI and ML approaches can really differentiate us or enable us to take the offering and hence the value that can be realized by our end users to another level. And when we feel as though there is a real differentiator or the ability to deliver a materially improved product to our end users, then that's worth the investment. So those are just the sort of business end considerations we make.
Really, really great points. And people, I think, don't realize the importance of that maintenance aspect. That tends to be the forgotten piece, right? Is how much is this going to be to maintain to keep this doing what it says it's going to be doing and really be there for the long haul. Dr. Amal, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah. So also remember what we were talking about a little bit earlier was about the opinionation of data. Longitudinally, medicine evolves. Our insights into it. So exactly what Megan was referring to, it's the constant perpetual maintenance of the gold standard training sets that are utilized. Then the constant maintenance of that model, and from our side, it's like making sure that there's not too much of a semantic drift between different type of concepts. I mean, these are very, very resource intensive type of evaluation work that needs to be done. And operationally, that's where you always have to do that type of evaluation of, hey, we could build something really cool, but it's going to take 200 people to maintain it, or we want to make sure that this is appropriate for our providers and not, significant, will not injure a patient longitudinally. And these are like the type of like evaluations that us and who are really investing hard into this have to make these type of determinations. So it's really, 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 really resource intensive, very strategic type of decision making, and then also understanding like just the operationalization behind the scenes.
Makes sense. Considering the fast-paced evolution of technology, how do we ensure the long-term sustainability and relevance of AI, the types of AI solutions that you guys are bringing to the table in healthcare? What strategies do you employ to future-proof kind of your AI initiatives against other technological things? Dr. Mary Jacobson, I'd love for you to just kind of answer that. What are things that you're doing to future-proof, what you're offering to the industry?
So right now, like I mentioned, we do a lot of machine learning on the back end at Alpha. And in my world, what I'm seeing, again, AI to real world problems like my colleagues talked about. So as an example, we've treated over 300,000 patients for obesity. And looking at that data from an AI standpoint, and then stratifying patients based on their responses to anti-obesity medication and deciding on what is the best treatment for that patient. So again, in my world, we're seeing the commercials of Ozempic and Mounjaro, and employers don't really want to pay the cost of the GLP-1s. That's $1,200 to $1,500 a month. So how can we structure a program around that? And the last thing that I want to mention is there've been some great research out of the Mayo Clinic that looked at phenotyping obesity, and there are 4 different phenotypes, and that was based on AI and stratifying patients with respect to their responses based on their phenotype. So for me, that's like a real world application in AI that I'm very excited about.
Dr. Dirks, I'd love for you to answer this question as well. Oh, you're on mute. Dr. Amal. Actually, let's kind of move on to another question that we got from the chat. They asked, given that you need consumers to act on their circumstance, how are you creating the ability to have unique, personal, ongoing conversations with consumers using AI digital communication? So the question is, how are you getting beyond generative AI to conversational AI that's relational rather than just transactional? Is that happening? And so that's a question I'd love for you to answer, Dr. Amal Bala.
Oh, that's an interesting one. So
Yeah.
so the way that we kind of were thinking about that going in a conversational manner is to basically have a couple ways to augment or basically educate a large language model behind the scenes. And I think everybody out here is very comfortable with the RAG approach, the RAG approach, the retrieval augmented generation approach of large language models. But that's just one facet of it. Other organizations who are developing these LLMs are also creating another sets of functionalities to store, to query different types of storage mechanisms and so forth like that. So the investment thesis is towards getting towards a conversational type of transaction, is to use a couple of these type of storage mechanisms to kind of say, hey, it's kind of what Mary was talking about. It's the decision tree behind the scenes to elucidate to something, but that will take you to the edge nodes, and that's where everything kind of gets fuzzy, the edge cases, and then using another type of storage mechanism, which is mostly around deterministic ways to store data to help us elucidate that type of edge cases and give that nuances. But how do you kind of stitch it all together? You have to give these LLMs guardrails. So of course, there's a combination of like prompt engineering. There's other ways too. There's actually NVIDIA released a package out there called guardrails for their GPUs. But there's so many different ways to kind of get there. But it's really just going to be an evolution. All this is very experimentational. There's a lot of ways to approach it. And so I think the goal is we want to get to a way to converse with it, but there's a lot of how we as humans kind of approach it. It's really, like we know like hard facts, but then we infer something. And so it's trying to get to that level of inference and causality. And that's going to be a journey, I think, where AI may evolve into the next level of what it is today. So I see it as an evolution of multiple different types of technological approaches. But as I said, it's an experiment, it's a journey, and we're all in it for a ride.
Really interesting. There's another question about how you navigate and comply with evolving regulatory frameworks now and with all of those considerations. So when you're developing and deploying AI solutions, what have these regulatory changes, influenced your decision-making process in terms of your in-house development and things like that? So Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love to
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I'll step back and say first, I think that at least in the the regulatory authorities that I think the most about are FDA. It may just be a little bit unique to the use cases and the customer base that Komodo Health has. But the FDA, of course, it has significant interest in this, both in a positive, like how can it be used for their purpose, as well as what are some of the challenges that they may face. So I would say one of the things that I've found with regulatory authorities like the FDA are that first, they acknowledge that they really need to partner with experts. And so you need to first lead with a willingness and an ability to advise and guide and provide some knowledge transfer to them so that they are actually thinking about risk-based regulatory strategy in an informed way. So I think they're open for partnership. It's important to do that. It's important to have industry who is developing these techniques at the table, but really in a sort of mentoring way. The second is, and again, I'll be a little centric towards the FDA, is that as I think about how to adjust their regulatory framework to accommodate AI and ML, which has less transparency associated with it, you can sort of lead with helping them embrace AI and ML for some of the tasks that they have to do. So post-market surveillance, safety surveillance is absolutely one of the best opportunities for AI and ML to help with. And that is around signal detection in a massive noise and being able to refine that signal and develop some inferences around causality. And so I think they're very open to that. And it's really enabling them to see gains that may enable them also to become comfortable with how they then approach the sort of rulemaking for use cases or applications of AI that customers or manufacturers, life sciences companies may bring to them. So that was sort of an indirect way of describing it, but hopefully it helps elucidate sort of our approach and our thinking.
Really interesting. Dr. Mary Jacobson, I'd love for you to respond to this as well from your perspective.
Sure, Grace. From my perspective, my regulatory boards are the medical boards of each state in the country, and they have various, regulations around telemedicine, how you establish a relationship with the patient. The first visit may have to be in person. Telemedicine isn't even an option. Maybe it has to be at least audio or audio video like we're doing. They don't even look at asynchronous as a way to establish or continue a relationship with the patient. So we have to navigate a lot of regulatory issues times 51, including the District of Columbia. And then for us, we use the American Telemedicine Association to advocate for us, but also advocating with state legislatures, thinking about the percentage of our population that lives in rural America that doesn't have access to broadband, that would have to drive 2 hours for a visit in person. So anyway, so I'm happy to see there's been advancement with respect to AI and ML with telemedicine, especially with COVID. Unfortunately, it's rolled back a little bit, and it is state specific to a certain degree.
So fascinating, so interesting, and so interesting that all of us are in the data and analytics, community and are using AI, but there are so many different types of regulations that matter to you depending on where you are in the ecosphere, right? Dr. Amal Bala, I'd love for you to answer this question too.
Oh my! So yes, I'm gonna echo. I'm gonna echo both Megan and Mary on this one. Yes, we're keeping an eye at the larger regulatory level, FDA, of course, ONC. Really seeing also, I think we've also seen where currently there was an executive order for kind of talking about information blocking. So we have to keep an eye on everything. So that's the federal level, but then of course, like for instance, how we transactionally work with this data too at a state level. I've been in Arizona since 1985, so I've seen this state evolve to what it is today. Working on one of my very first projects outside of my academic world was integration of the state's HIE into the largest Medicaid and Medicare underwriters. If you didn't know this, that once you participate in the HIE, you have to explicitly opt out of physical health data. I'm just making sure I get my notes right. But then on mental health data, you have to explicitly opt in. And as you go from state to state, these type of regulations play an implication on how we transmit data. That data in itself is used as a gold standard once we clean it up as training sets for our machine learning models. So we have to think of when we're developing these type of new strategies, new technologies, and investing into it, we have to think of the holistic picture from that individual person, how their data, how they attest to that data, to the big picture of how the big regulatory players are influencing on it. So that's how we kind of approach it.
Brilliant, brilliant. So we have a question from the crowd that I want to ask you all. It's a really good one. Have any of you been able to use large language models for quantitative use cases? Analysis of data set, for example, and what has been your experience with reproducibility? Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love to hear that from you.
So I'm going to try to answer that question, and I might be deflecting it. And I think it's around LLMs. So we do have quantitative performance metrics that we embed around our current use case around LLMs. So we have trained LLMs on our own internal knowledge base. We have a very deep and rich knowledge base, which essentially is a curation of clinical knowledge from our physicians, PharmDs, et cetera. And we've trained it on that. So the quantitative LLMs don't generate a number per se as an answer. Instead, although I think you could embed some additional sort of computational strategies in it, it just needs to interpret that you're asking that. But instead, I would say quantitatively, though, we do very important operational metrics around how much more quickly the cohort was generated, how much more accurately or reliably, how many more iterations. We use the LLMs to enable an end user to do iterative sort of refinement of their thinking, which is much closer to the way that a human thinks. And so we always embed quantitative metrics around that, more or less, to sort of assess the performance. But I don't know if the question was more around, as you're doing an LLM, can you ask it to do a calculation? And I think that's, we don't do that, but that's very feasible.
Yes, interesting. And how do you all measure the success of your AI implementations that you do choose to develop, for both a clinical and business perspective? Can you share any KPIs that are particularly relevant to assessing the impact of an AI investment that you make in terms of development and execution? And Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love for you to start with that.
I'll start with that. I'll be brief so I can hand off to my other
Thanks
colleagues.
so much.
I would say that it's an area of sensitivity because there is a perception that you're actually taking humans out of the loop, but we are able to actually train our LLM in terms of the LLM application of AI to do things that previously we'd have a business analyst doing very manually. And so, for example, like the co-pilots, it can generate code, it can define cohorts, allow very quick adaptation of cohorts, whereas we used to have to assign consultants to that. And I would say this is where sort of our broader, maybe some of the audience members are perhaps already thinking about this, which is every dollar that you had to spend on consultancy to do a particular analytic task or support basic analyses, LLMs can be generated to do that in a very automated way, as long as they can be trained effectively on the right base. And that's I think, a real significant KPI on our part, which is automation, where we previously had sort of low value but very resource intensive human intervention.
Dr. Bala, I'd love for you to answer this as well.
I'm gonna piggyback on what Megan said too. Is there's also a cost benefit analysis about that type of leveraging of LLMs too. Integration into a tech stack, LLMs are not cheap by any means. So, for instance, if you're doing API calls all the time to the back end of an OpenAI service, how much is that going to cost you versus bringing that consultant in? So you have to kind of go that type of level of analysis too. So a couple ways that we've kind of approached this type of questioning is we have in our data enablement portfolio, we have a lot of the traditional approaches for natural language processing. So if you're familiar with natural language processing, there's about 7 unique steps that are necessary to really just come up with the proper way to extract a known entity, then compare it towards something. So what we've been doing is literally seeing what our traditional methods are versus what the new technology can take us, and what type of parity are we getting, or what type of enhancements are getting. Is this the directionality? As I said in our previous question, it's a lot of experimentation, but even in that experimentation, there's a cost associated with it too. So that's how we've been kind of approaching it in that way. But then it goes back to exactly what Mika was saying is co-pilot, operational efficiency. Can we give our teams more of a force factor, more leverage? Change the role from, let's say, a one high touch, highly contextualized data. Can we generalize the approach with a large language model? Can we train it up to support us behind the scenes? So that's another way that we've been approaching it too. And then seeing how fast we can get that type of operations in place. Does it give us that? So it's always experimentation right now, and more to come.
Absolutely. I'm sure so many echo what you are saying now on this call. Just, we got to figure this out, right? We have to do it. If we don't do rapid experimentation, we are going to be stuck in the past, and healthcare, we're done with that. Dr. Mary Jacobson, I'd love for you to, respond to that, but I also want to know, how do you establish feedback loops to gather insights from the AI solutions advancements that you're making? Can you share an example, where user feedback led to a significant enhancement to the AI in your system that you're using?
Sure, and I totally agree with Amal about having an iterative approach. So, as you may recall, when COVID hit and Paxlovid finally came out to treat COVID, initially Paxlovid wasn't well supplied or stocked throughout the country, and county by county had limits on the number of Paxlovid packages they had. The CDC had some type of a I don't know what it's called, widget or something, where you could supposedly find the pharmacies that were supplying Paxlovid. And our engineers basically rejiggered that. Sorry, I don't know the language, to help patients find access to Paxlovid based on their zip code. And that was a bit of an iterative process. And obviously things change over time, right? Because the supply chain changed, but they were plugged into, I don't know what, on the back end. So they had access to this data. So that was a huge feature for our patients that they could use in terms of getting access to Paxlovid. In terms of the other part, right, because I'm talking about two users, at least on our platform, I'm talking about the patient and then the providers that are using the system. And so when we build out these, let's say a risk calculator for cardiovascular disease as an example, or I mentioned the PHQ-9 or mood disorder screen, we, the providers, of course, we want to make sure it's accurate. So we'll double check it and go to another website or go to the CDC or recalculate ourselves to make sure it's accurate. Sometimes it wasn't. So again, iterating on that, or even how things are displayed to the end user, which I think is more of a design thing. But it, again, really iterative process. And to your point, Grace, you have to iterate fast.
You really do. I'd love to hear from anyone else in the panel. Do you have feedback loops set up to help inform continuous improvement of your AI solutions?
Well, we always do extensive internal use because I think, some of our own data scientists, developers, and commercial teams are themselves really effective in putting it through the paces before we would then release it. But we rely heavily on, the customer experience, both in advance of deciding about investing in something, making sure that we're aligning with what the current unmet need is out in the industry, and then doing very rapid. We identify individuals who are willing to kind of test it out, test the assumptions that we had when we built it. So always use to the extent possible who your end users are going to be throughout the sort of cycle. Those they can give you great insight and great feedback. And you have to be prepared at some point to also say, despite the sunk cost, if this isn't really solving a problem effectively, or it's not delivering a higher value given the cost, then we table it for now and come back to it later.
Great points. Really interesting. Looking ahead, How do all of you envision the continued evolution of AI in healthcare, continued the rapid advancements and the rapid iterations happening? You discuss key challenges and opportunities foreseen for the industry. Dr. Amal Bala, I'd love for you to take that one.
Oh, definitely. So it's really interesting, and I think everybody in this forum will agree. The expansion of data is exponential in the next couple years. I mean, there's so many different sites that say, hey, we're going to hit this type of number, but a common number that is being thrown around is like a zettabyte, or actually 181 zettabytes of data will be aggregated and transmitted by the year 2025. And just to give you an idea how big a zettabyte is, it's 1 trillion gigabytes, and somebody could correct me or wrong, but your average computer has about, a terabyte of information, which is like 1,000 gigabytes. So it kind of gives you the scale. So this technology is going to have to start evolving just because of the scale of data that we're going to be looking at, the opinionation of that type of data that's embedded in it, and try to elucidate some cool, novel insights. So that's where my brain always goes, is it's not going to be just an investment thesis. It's almost going to be a must. And so that's how I see the directionality of where organizations such as ourselves are investing towards, but then also the need for it. It's just because the data is getting bigger, more nuanced, and it's becoming more available. It's no longer isolated. So it's going to be a fun journey.
Absolutely. Dr. Mary Jacobson, how do you envision the future of continued evolution of AI?
So I look at the evolution of AI as I'm riding the electric bike. I'm taking it where it needs to go. I know where I want to go, okay, but that's going to facilitate and help me get there faster. I don't see AI as a robot vacuum, as an example. So I'm still going to be making decisions, but like my colleagues were saying, hopefully there'll be less of the art of medicine and more based on data that's actionable, that we can all agree on. Again, removing implicit bias and other biases we may have, or other opinions we may have, or a case study that we may have of one patient that we treated, 3 years ago. So I'm looking at our field advancing in that way.
Absolutely. Briefly before we end, Dr. Megan Dirks, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I want to take people a little bit upstream to the bedside. And I think already AI has absolutely become transformative in the discovery of new therapeutics. And as we move toward what I consider sort of precision medicine, the need for the tooling and its effectiveness are really going to give us, hopefully deliver into the hands of providers new therapeutics in a much faster pace. And related to that, I think AI can have some transformative effects on the execution of clinical trials, which are themselves becoming increasingly complex, longer to do, and resulting in far longer processes before we are able to deliver those new novel therapeutics. So I did want to make sure we talked a little bit about the promise and actual reality right now of AI's effect on developing new therapeutics.
That's so impactful. Thank you so much for that. And thanks to all of you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us all. Thank you to the esteemed panelists, to Health for putting this on, and to all of you for tuning in and having such great questions. Never forget that all of us in healthcare are a link in the chain of the life-saving process. So innovate, inspire, collaborate, iterate, and push the envelope, to improve patient care for all of us. Thanks to everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you to our speakers and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth.com to catch up on all Health Go Live webinars. And join us in Los Angeles, February 25th through 28th for VIVE 2024.